Hey guys, in this video, we are going to be learning about how to solve vertical motion types of problems. So these problems involve objects that have been thrown. So on page 72, towards the middle of the page, we have a little informational section here. It says, if an object is thrown up or down, we have to take the initial velocity into account. So therefore, we use this formula right here. So you should notice that the only difference between this formula and the one we use for dropped and fallen objects is this middle term here. So V stands for velocity, T is still for time. So now you need to remember that velocity can be positive if something is moving upward. It can be negative if something is moving down. And it could also be 0 for something that is not moving. All right, so let's see how this works. So we have the first problem here says you toss a tennis ball upward from a height of 96 feet with an initial velocity of 16 feet per second. So the first thing we need to do is write our equation. So we know that we are going to deal with h equals negative 16t squared. That part never changes. Then v in the formula here is your velocity, which they told us was 16 feet per second. So plus 16t. And then S stands for starting height or initial height. And it says that we started at 96 feet. So I'm going to put plus 96 at the end. Now, since these problems have a b term here, we cannot solve using the square root method. We instead are going to use the quadratic formula. So if you remember, that formula is the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. And we're going to fill that whole thing in. So the a value is negative 16, b is 16, and c is 96. All right, so let's fill in our formula. The opposite of b is negative 16, plus minus square root. We have b squared, so 16 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 16, times c, which is 96, all over 2 times a, which is negative 16. Now, since these are word problems, we don't want our answer to have a radical in them. So we're going to make sure that we get our decimals from this. So instead of doing this in parts like we did previously, we're just going to type the whole thing in the calculator. So here's how that looks. Start by typing in the fraction button. Then I have negative 16. We're going to do the plus first. And then the square root of 16 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 96. And then I'm going to use the arrow to go down and put in 2 times negative 16. And then I'm going to arrow over to change to a decimal. That's this button right above the enter key. And then hit enter. And it gives us negative 2. So our first answer that we get is negative 2. Now we're going to do the same thing except subtract instead. Instead of retyping everything, just go up until it highlights all of that work that we just did, then hit enter. That's your copy and paste feature. Then just use the left arrow until you get to that plus sign after the negative 16. So it's going to take a minute. And I want you to change that to a minus. Then hit enter, and we get 3. So my two answers are negative 2 and 3. But if I'm thinking about the problem here, I want to know how long it takes for the tennis ball to hit the ground below. And negative 2 seconds isn't really going to work for us because you can't have negative seconds. So that one does not count. So negative 3 seconds is the answer that we're looking, or sorry, not negative 3, positive 3 seconds is the answer that we're looking for here. It's going to take 3 seconds for that tennis ball to hit the ground. So in the future, when you're doing these types of problems, any negative answer that you get can just be disregarded and you just keep the positive one. It's possible for you to get 2 positive answers, and then you just need to think about which one is the correct one. And we'll talk about that if we come across it here. All right, next problem. You kick a football into the air with an initial velocity of 31 feet per second. The ball makes contact with your foot 2 feet above the ground. So first we need to write our equation. So that's h equals negative 16t squared. Plus, my initial velocity is 31 feet per second, so 31t. And then it makes contact with my foot 2 feet above the ground. So 2 goes in for my initial height. All right, so something we haven't talked about yet is maximum height of the football. So when you're thinking about what's going on here, you're kicking the football, it's traveling up, 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 and at some point it stops going up and starts coming back down. So here's where that quadratic look comes in, and I'm looking for that maximum height, which is right here, which is also your vertex. So basically this question, this maximum height question, is asking what is the vertex of this quadratic. So if you remember, that formula is x equals the opposite of b over 2a. Well, my b value is 31, and the opposite of that is negative 31, over 2 times my a, which is negative 16. So let's see what we get here. So we have negative 31 over 2 times negative 16, which is 31 over 32, or 0.97. So 0.97 is the x value. Now, the x value of your vertex tells you how long it takes to get to that maximum height. I want to know what that max height is. So I need to take this and plug it back into the formula in order to find out what the maximum height is. So if you're not certain about this, remember the t's are basically x's. So really I should have a t here. So that's the time it takes. I want the height that the football is at that time. So I'm going to do h equals negative 16 times 0.97 squared plus 31 times 0.97 plus 2. And I'm going to let the calculator do all that work for sure. So negative 16 times 0.97 squared plus 31 times 0.97 plus 2. And that is 17.02. So h equals 17.02 feet. That's the highest that the football gets. All right, then it wants to know how long will it take for it to reach the ground. That is where the quadratic formula comes in. So I'm going to have the opposite of b, which is negative 31, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 31 squared, minus 4 times negative 16 times 2, all over 2 times negative 16. Okay, let's use our calculators. So we have negative 31 plus the square root of 31 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 2, all over 2 times negative 16. Change to decimal, and I get negative 0.0625. So that's not the answer I want. So copy and paste, change to a minus. And we get 2. So it takes the football 2 seconds to reach the ground. Now, it's not always going to be a whole number. Just keep that in mind. All right, let's try another. It says, a rocket is launched from the ground with an initial upward velocity of 224 feet per second. So first thing it wants is us to write our equation. So h equals negative 16t squared. The velocity is 224 feet per second, so plus 224t. And then it says it's launched from the ground. So that means the starting height is 0. So if you want to put plus 0 at the end, you can, but you definitely don't have to. All right, it says how long will it take the rocket to reach its maximum height? So that is the t value of my vertex. So it's t equals, opposite of b is negative 224 over 2 times a, which is negative 16. So negative 224 over 2 times negative 16 is 7. So it's going to take that rocket 7 seconds to reach its maximum height. Now let's find out what that maximum height actually is. So negative 16 times 7 squared plus 224 times 7. So negative 16 times 7 squared plus 224 times 7 is 784 feet. That's how high up the rocket gets. Now it wants to know when the rocket will reach the ground again, okay? So let's figure this out. Remember, it started on the ground. I want to know when it reaches the ground again. So the opposite of b is negative 224 plus or minus the square root of 224 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times c, which is 0. You do have to put the 0 in there. All over 2 times negative 16. All right, so let's put that in a calculator and see what we get. So negative 224 plus the square root of 224 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 0 all over 2 times negative 16. And I get 0. Okay, so 0 is my first answer. Copy and paste. Change that plus to a minus. And we get 14. Now, here's one of the instances where you get two positive numbers. So let's talk about which one makes more sense. So this is 0 seconds and 14 seconds. Now remember, this rocket started on the ground. So this 0 seconds is actually the very starting point when it's on the ground. So before anything has happened, it's on the ground. So then it's going up, 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 and then it's going to come back down. So that means this is where the 14 seconds occurs. This is where the 0 seconds occurs. I'm not looking for the starting. I'm looking for when it comes back down again. So 0 is not the answer I'm looking for. I'm looking for 14 seconds. So keep that in mind. Sometimes you can get two positive answers, and you just kind of have to think about which one makes more sense. All right, let's do one more problem. It says, from the top of a 30-foot window, you throw your keys downward to a friend on the ground at a velocity of 20 feet per second. All right, so do you see this keyword, downward? This is where the velocity is negative, okay? So we have h equals negative 16t squared, and then minus, and the velocity is 20 feet per second, so 20t, and you started at 30 feet, so plus 30, okay? All right, so it says your friend is clumsy and will not catch the keys, which honestly is probably a good idea. How long will it take for the keys to reach the ground? So the opposite of b is 20 plus or minus the square root of negative 20 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 30 all over 2 times negative 16. All right, let's type all that in. 20 plus the square root of negative 20 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 30 all over 2 times negative 16. And I get negative 2.13, which is not what I'm going to keep. So let's copy and paste. Change that plus to a minus. And we get 0.88. So 0.88 seconds. So it takes less than a second for those keys to reach the ground, which makes sense because you're throwing them downward. And that's it. That's how you use the quadratic formula to solve objects that have been thrown.